Hi everyone! Today I'll be going over Chapter 7 of our Drugs and Behavior textbook titled Depressants and Inhalants, and I'll be going over the first quarter of the chapter, which is roughly pages 143 to 146. First, I'll be going over some important chapter terminology. First, there are sedatives, which are drugs used to relax, calm, or reduce anxiety. Then there are depressants, which are drugs that slow activity in the CNS or the central nervous system. Barbiturates, which are a chemical group of sedative hypnotics. Benzodiazepines, which is a chemical grouping of sedative hypnotics, such as Xanax and Ativan. Then there are hypnotics, which are drugs used to induce sleep. Inhalants, which are volatile solvents inhaled for intoxicating purposes. Examples could be glue or paint, and these products also fall into the category of CNS depressants due to their typical effects. And then GHB, which is used recreationally as a depressant. So before there were barbiturates, there was chloral hydrate, which is a hypnotic agent that was synthesized in 1829 and was not clinically used until about 1870. When taken orally, it has a short onset period of about 30 minutes, and 1 to 2 grams will induce sleep in less than an hour. There was also paraldehyde, which was synthesized in 1829 and introduced clinically in 1882. It's an effective CNS depressant with little respiratory depression and a wide safety margin. However, it's not very popular because it has a very bad taste and odor. Then there was barbiturates. So they were the first CNS depressant prescription medication to be widely used and abused, although they have now been largely replaced by more modern drugs. They were first introduced in 1902 and became very important with over 2,500 different examples. Some common examples are phenobarbital, amobarbital, and secobarbital. Barbiturates are grouped according to the duration of time, which is how long the drug's effects last, which corresponds with the time of onset, which is how quickly they act after being taken orally. Short-acting barbiturates begin to produce effects in as little as 15 minutes and have effects lasting only 2 or 3 hours. Long-acting barbiturates may take an hour to produce effects, but it can last for 8 hours or more. Low doses of 30 to 50 milligrams were used to reduce daytime nervousness and anxiety, and phenobarbital was typically prescribed as a sedative. Higher doses of about 100 to 200 milligrams were used as sleeping pills, and secobarbital was typically prescribed as a sleeping pill, which is a shorter-acting drug. Barbiturates were associated with intentional and accidental overdose deaths. The cause of death is usually respiratory depression, which is typical with CNS depressants. With high daily doses, individuals could become tolerant and would have to increase the dose to several hundred milligrams per day. This led to physical dependence and withdrawal symptoms if it was stopped abruptly. Dependence and overdose deaths weren't big concerns for people being treated with sedatives, which is a low dose of slow-acting drugs. Problems typically recurred from sleeping pill prescriptions, which were higher doses of fast-acting drugs. Concerns about overdoses and psychological and physical dependence led to a bad reputation for barbiturates, and by 1950, there were safer substitutes. Next, there was meprobamates, which were patented in 1952 and were believed to be a new and unique type of CNS depressant. The FDA approved its use in 1955, and it became widely prescribed due to physicians' concerns about prescribing barbiturates. It became clear that, like barbiturates, it can produce psychological and physical dependence. Physical dependence can result from taking a bit more than twice a normal dose. In 1970, it became a Scheduled IV controlled substance. It is still available for prescriptions, but has been largely replaced by benzodiazepines. Next was methaqualones. So due to reports of overdose and physical dependence associated with secobarbital and amobarbital sleeping pills, the market was open for a less dangerous hypnotic. Methaqualone was synthesized in India and introduced as a non-prescription drug in Germany in 1960. 10 to 20% of drug overdoses in the early 1960s resulted from misuse. The first reported methaqualone suicide was reported in 1962, and Germany changed the drug to prescription only in 1963. There was also a problem in Japan, as methaqualone was the culprit of more than 40% of drug overdoses there. Brand names of methaqualone, such as Quaalude and Sapor, were introduced to the U.S. as prescription drugs in 1965 after 3 years of testing. The package insert for these drugs said addiction potential not established. Clearly, the U.S. was not paying attention to other countries at this time. By 1973, methaqualone was put on Schedule II, and by 1985, it was no longer available as a prescription drug and became Schedule I. So next we have benzodiazepines. It was first marketed under the trade name Librium, possibly because it liberates anxieties. In 1960, it was marketed as a more selective anti-anxiety agent that produced less drowsiness than barbiturates and a larger safety margin. Physical dependence was almost unheard of, and overdose seemed not to occur except if combined with alcohol or other depressant drugs. Even strong psychological dependence seemed to be rare with this drug. The conclusion was that benzodiazepines were as effective as barbiturates and much safer. Librium became the leading psychoactive drug and prescription drug. It was supplanted in the early 1970s by Valium, a more potent and lower dose agent made by the same company. Valium, or diazepam, was the leading seller from 1972 to 1978. Alprazolam is currently the most widely prescribed drug among this class of drugs. As these drugs became widely used, reports of psychological dependence, occasional physical dependence, and overdose deaths appeared again. Diazepam was one of the most frequently mentioned drugs in the Dawn reports at that time. So the question was, what happened to the big difference between barbiturates and benzodiazepines? So it may not be the chemical class of drugs that make a difference, but the dose and time. Overdose deaths are more likely when sold in higher doses for hypnotic effects. Psychological dependence develops more rapidly when the drug hits the brain quickly, which is why intravenous use of heroin produces more dependence than oral use. And then physical dependence occurs when the drug leaves the system more rapidly than the body can adapt. To reduce withdrawal symptoms, the drug user should reduce the drug slowly over time. And then drugs with a shorter duration of action leave the system quickly and are more likely to produce withdrawal symptoms than longer-acting drugs. And then in the 1990s, a new version of Mickey-Finn, or chloral hydrate, was popularized. Rohypnol is a benzodiazepine sold as a hypnotic in many countries around the world, except the US, because of reports of placing them in women's drinks. The combination of rohypnol and alcohol produces profound intoxication, which is why rohypnol, otherwise known as roofies, is known as the date rape drug.